Once upon a time, not too long ago, in a small village hidden away from the rest of the world, something truly strange and unforgettable took place. The night Nala went into labor, the entire village was still. But in her small hut, strange things were happening. The wind howled through closed windows, the fire flickered as if it had a life of its own, and shadows seemed to shift in the corners. As the village midwives rushed to deliver the child, they could feel something was different, something they couldn't explain. When the baby finally arrived, silence fell, but not from relief. The room froze in shock. Nala looked down at her newborn and gasped, her heart racing with confusion. The child in her arms was like no other. This wasn't just any birth. It was the beginning of a story the village would never forget. Her mother, Nala, had always been healthy, but when she became pregnant, mysterious things started happening. The first sign came when Nala's belly grew faster than anyone had ever seen. By her third month, it looked as if she were ready to give birth. The village women whispered behind her back, saying that no child could grow so fast. Then the dreams began. Every night, Nala dreamed of walking through a dark forest with two shadows following her, one tall, one small. They never spoke, but Nala could feel their presence, as if they were watching over her. In her dreams, animals bowed before her as she passed, and the moon seemed to light her path in a way that made her feel both powerful and afraid. The night Dudu was born, the air in the hut was thick with tension. Nala had been in labor for hours, her cries echoing through the village as the midwives worked tirelessly to bring the child into the world. Nala's husband, Bayo, stood outside, pacing back and forth under the light of the full moon, worry etched into his face. Inside the hut, the air was heavy with sweat, incense, and the low hum of prayers. Finally, after a final scream that seemed to tear through the night, the midwife held up the baby. A brief moment of silence filled the room, then a collective gasp. Nala, exhausted but eager to see her child, pushed herself up on her elbows, her heart pounding in anticipation. But instead of the usual smiles and laughter that followed a birth, the midwives exchanged looks of shock and confusion. The eldest midwife, Mama Kato, slowly wiped the newborn clean, her hands trembling as she examined the child closely. Her face, usually calm and composed, was frozen in disbelief. "What is it? Is my child healthy?" Nala asked, her voice weak but filled with hope. The midwife hesitated before gently handing the baby to Nala. "The child is both," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nala's eyes widened in disbelief as she looked down at her newborn. Her heart stopped for a moment. At first, all she saw was the tiny wrinkled face of her child, perfectly formed, with wide, curious eyes. But as her gaze shifted downward, she realized what Mama Kato had meant. Her baby had both male and female private parts. Nala's mouth opened slightly, her breath catching in her throat as the room seemed to spin around her. But deep down, something inside her whispered that this child was meant for something extraordinary. Despite the shock, she held Dudu closer to her chest, as if shielding her baby from the world that might never understand her. Word spread fast, and soon the entire village was buzzing with shock and fear. "The spirits have played a cruel trick," the people said. "No child can be both a boy and a girl." But Mama Kato stepped forward, her voice steady and firm. "No," she said, "the spirits do not make mistakes. This child carries two spirits, one of the boys, one of the girls. Both are needed." The villagers were uneasy, unsure how to address the child. Naming a child was an important tradition, and names were often tied to gender. But Dudu's family chose a different path. They named her Dudu, which means black, a tribute to her beautiful deep dark skin that shimmered like polished stone. It was a name that celebrated her beauty and strength, and it was safe, neither male nor female, just like her. Dudu was as skilled with the boys as she was with the girls. When she played with the boys, they would run to the fields with their slingshots, ready to hunt birds or knock down fruits from tall trees. Dudu was a natural, her aim sharp and steady. The boys marveled at how quickly she could spot a target, how she didn't flinch under pressure. She could run as fast as them, climb trees as high as the tallest boy, and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Whether it was wrestling in the dirt or racing across the fields, Dudu's strength and agility earned her the respect of the boys. She knew how to challenge them too. When the boys would boast about who could throw the farthest stone or jump the highest, Dudu would quietly step forward and outdo them without needing to say a word. She didn't have to be the loudest or the toughest. Her skill spoke for itself, and soon enough, the boys stopped teasing her and started including her in their games without hesitation, treating her like one of their own. Her competitive spirit was strong, but she was never harsh. She played to win, but she played fair. When she played with the girls, however, Dudu moved with a different grace. The girls would sit together under the shade of the baobab tree, braiding each other's hair and singing songs. Dudu's fingers were as quick and gentle with the strands of hair as they were with a bow and arrow. She would help weave the most intricate patterns, her hands working skillfully, and the girls admired her for it. In games of rhythm and clapping, Dudu's timing was perfect, her laughter mingling with the girls as they danced and sang. She understood the softness of their world too. When they gathered around the fire to cook or told stories late into the night, Dudu's presence was calming, and the girls felt she belonged just as much as they did. She knew how to listen when it was important, how to make others feel safe. Her ability to balance between the boys' rough and tumble games and the girls' more delicate ones made her unlike anyone else in the village. It didn't matter whether she was playing with the boys or the girls. Dudu knew how to move between both worlds, excelling in each without ever losing herself. One day, when she was 14, Dudu went to the river alone. She sat on the bank, looking at her reflection in the water, wondering why she was born this way. "Who am I?" she whispered to the river, hoping for an answer. As she stared into the water, an old turtle swam up. It was known that turtles lived a long time and carried the wisdom of the land. "You are asking the wrong question," the turtle said, its voice as deep as the river itself. "It is not, 'Who am I?' but 'What am I meant to do?'" Dudu didn't understand, but she listened. "Long ago," the turtle continued, "there was a girl just like you, born with both boy and girl spirits. The people didn't understand her, but when the village was in trouble, she saved them. She brought balance where others could not. She saw the world through two sets of eyes, two hearts, and that made her strong." Dudu thought about the turtle's words as it swam away. She realized that maybe her difference was not a curse but a gift. She could see things others couldn't, feel things others didn't. She could walk with the boys and the girls, belong to both worlds. As the years passed, Dudu's wisdom grew. She became a healer, using her understanding of the body, both male and female, to help others. When conflict arose in the village, she was the one to bring peace, for she knew what it was like to live between worlds. Slowly, the people stopped whispering about her and started listening to her. They came to her for advice, for healing, for guidance. The year the strange sickness struck the village, fear spread faster than the illness itself. It started slowly, just a few men complaining of aches and fever. But soon, the village was gripped by panic as one after another, strong men fell to the ground, burning with fever, their joints swollen and painful. The sickness was relentless, stealing the strength of even the most resilient among them. The women wailed, and the village elder's face grew darker with worry. No one knew how to stop it. Dudu watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy as she saw the men grow weaker. Even Mama Kato, the wise village healer, seemed helpless. She had tried every herb, every remedy she knew, but the sickness didn't respond. The village had never seen anything like it. Dudu, though still young, had spent her life understanding both male and female bodies. She knew there was something different about this illness. It seemed to attack the men as if their bodies were fighting something from deep within. One evening, Dudu sat quietly by the river, her mind racing. She remembered the times she had seen women fall ill after giving birth, their bodies feverish, their strength drained. The symptoms weren't exactly the same, but there was a familiarity about the way the men's bodies were reacting. It felt like their energy, their life force, was out of balance. It was something she had only seen before in women, when their bodies struggled to recover from childbirth. Could it be that the same herbs used to calm a woman's body after birth might help the men too? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of coughing. Nilo, one of the strongest hunters, lay on the ground, his chest heaving, sweat pouring from his brow. Dudu knelt beside him, gently pressing her hand to his forehead. His skin burned like fire and his breath was shallow. His wife, Aduke, sat beside him, her face pale with fear. "Dudu, please," Aduke whispered, her voice trembling. "If there's anything you can do, anything." Dudu felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wasn't a trained healer like Mama Keto, but something deep within her urged her to act. She thought of the herbs used to bring balance after childbirth, the ones that calmed the body and restored energy. They were usually meant for women, but what if this sickness required a treatment no one had thought of? Without wasting time, Dudu stood up. "Wait here," she said softly. She hurried to the forest, where the herbs grew wild. The night was quiet, but her heart pounded with urgency. She gathered the herbs, crushing them between her hands, their familiar earthy smell calming her nerves. When she returned to Nilo's side, the other villagers gathered around, their faces filled with doubt and fear. Even Mama Kato stood back, watching Dudu's every move with curious eyes. Dudu mixed the herbs with water, her hands steady, but her mind racing with questions. What if it didn't work? What if she was wrong? But she pushed the doubts aside and leaned over Nilo. His breathing was shallow, his face pale and slick with sweat. She carefully poured the mixture into his mouth, her hands shaking slightly as she did so. For hours they waited. The night stretched on, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the labored breathing of the sick. Dudu stayed by Nilo's side, her heart heavy with fear, watching his chest rise and fall. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like a lifetime. And then, as dawn began to break, Nilo's breathing slowed. His fever had broken. The sweat that had drenched his body began to dry, and for the first time in days, his eyes fluttered open. He looked around, disoriented, but there was strength in his gaze that hadn't been there before. Dudu felt her heart leap in her chest. The villagers gasped, their eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you do?" Mama Kato asked, stepping forward. Her voice was filled with awe, but also confusion. "I used the herbs we give to women after childbirth," Dudu explained, her voice still shaky from the intensity of the moment. "Their bodies become weak, like the men's have when their energy is out of balance. The herbs restore the balance." Mama Kato's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly, as if realizing something she had never considered before. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, and soon they brought the other sick men to Dudu. One by one, she treated them, using the same mixture, and one by one, the men began to recover, their strength returning, their fevers breaking. The relief that swept over the village was palpable. Mothers cried tears of joy, wives clutched their husbands' hands in disbelief, and the children, who had been hiding behind their mothers in fear, finally dared to laugh again. Dudu, exhausted but filled with a quiet sense of purpose, sat back and watched as life slowly returned to the village. From that day forward, the villagers looked at Dudu with new eyes, not just as the girl who could play with the boys and girls alike, but as someone who carried the knowledge of both worlds in her heart. She had healed the village when no one else could, using her understanding of both male and female bodies, to bring balance where there had been none. And in doing so, she had proven that her difference was not a curse, but a gift. However, one night, as she slept by the river, the spirits from Nala's dreams appeared to her. In the moonlight, they finally spoke. "We did not make you by mistake, Dudu," they said. "You are born with both spirits because you are meant to choose one." Dudu was stunned. She had spent her whole life living between worlds, thinking her difference was a gift. But the spirits told her she was at a crossroads. If she chose to live as a man, she would inherit strength, leadership, and protection over the village. If she chose to live as a woman, she would continue her role as a healer, nurturing life and peace. Dudu sat in silence, staring at the moonlit river. The choice weighed heavily on her, knowing that whatever she chose would change the course of her life and the village's future forever. When she woke the next morning, Dudu made her decision, but she chose neither. She walked back to the village, her heart steady. "I am both, and I will remain both," she said. "I will continue to bring balance to this world, for I am not meant to be only one thing. The spirits have shown me that it is my path to walk in both worlds, to bring harmony where there is division." The village was shocked, but they could not deny Dudu's wisdom. She had healed them, guided them, and proven that her unique perspective was a gift, not a curse. In time, they accepted that Dudu's strength lay in her refusal to choose one side. She was a bridge between worlds, a living symbol of balance and unity. One hot afternoon, the village was bustling with preparations for a wedding. The air was filled with the scent of roasted yams and spicy stew, and colorful fabrics hung from trees, swaying in the gentle breeze. It was a joyous time, and Dudu watched from a distance, her heart heavy with thoughts she hadn't shared with anyone. She had just turned 20, and like many girls her age, she was expected to marry soon. The pressure from her family and the village was growing, and suitors had already started to show interest. But marriage terrified Dudu. She had always known she was different. While she admired the love and companionship she saw in others, something inside her recoiled at the thought of being tied to one role, one expectation for the rest of her life. She had lived between two worlds, sometimes feeling like a woman, other times like a man. Dudu had never quite fit the mold the village expected of her, and the thought of marriage seemed to tighten that mold around her, suffocating her individuality. Her doubts deepened on that day when she overheard a conversation between two young women from the village, Lami and Ireti, who were sitting under a large tree, giggling and whispering about their future husbands. Dudu was nearby, gathering firewood, and couldn't help but listen as their voices carried over the breeze. "I heard that once we marry, everything changes," Lami said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and fear. "You have to behave like a proper wife. No more running around or doing what you like." Ireti nodded, laughing. "Yes, you must become what your husband needs. They say a good wife is quiet, obedient, and makes her husband happy in every way." Dudu froze, the wood in her hands slipping to the ground. Quiet, obedient. She had never been either of those things. She had spent her life breaking boundaries, challenging what people thought she should be. The idea of molding herself into someone else's version of what a wife should be filled her with dread. That evening, as she sat by the river, alone with her thoughts, the words of the women played over and over in her mind. She could see her future clearly for the first time, standing in a small hut, confined to the role of a wife, expected to silence parts of herself just to fit into someone else's life. The thought crushed her. She had never fully belonged to either the world of men or the world of women, but she had made peace with that. How could she give herself to a marriage that required her to erase parts of who she was? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the water, Dudu made her decision. She would not marry. It wasn't because she didn't believe in love or companionship, but because she couldn't sacrifice her identity for it. She knew that marriage in her village came with expectations she couldn't meet, not because she didn't want to, but because doing so would mean giving up the freedom she had fought so hard to maintain. She had lived between worlds all her life, and in marriage, there was no space for that. Her decision weighed heavy on her heart, but as she stood up and began walking back to the village, she felt lighter. She knew she would face questions, disappointment, and judgment from her family and the village. But for Dudu, the cost of losing herself was far greater than the cost of remaining unmarried. She was determined to live her life fully, as both who she was and who she chose to be. Marriage would not define her. She would define herself. Dudu never married, never chose to live as just one or the other. She remained herself, both and neither. And in time, the village came to understand that she was not a mistake, but a blessing. The spirits had not sent her to fit in, but to show them something new. The village changed because of her. And in the end, Dudu realized that the turtle was right. The question was never about who she was, but what she was meant to do. The moral of the story is that embracing one's differences can be a source of strength and wisdom. Dudu, born with both male and female characteristics, used her unique perspective to navigate both worlds and bring balance to her community. Her ability to understand and accept both sides of herself allowed her to see things others could not, ultimately saving the village. The story teaches us that diversity is not something to fear or reject, but a gift that can bring harmony and healing when embraced. Everyone has a purpose, even if they don't fit into traditional roles. And so, Dudu's unique journey became a story passed down through generations, a reminder that our differences are often our greatest strengths. The spirits had not made a mistake. They had gifted Dudu with the ability to see the world in a way no one else could. Her story remains a powerful lesson of acceptance, balance, and the importance of walking between worlds. If you like this story, please subscribe so that we can bring you more interesting folktales like this one. Let me know your thoughts about Dudu in the comments. What did you learn from her journey? And don't forget to give us a thumbs up to encourage us to share even more stories with you.